Finding a place to call home has never been easy. When my parents first migrated here to Canada, they faced their own challenges. And today's generation faces their own unique challenges on what it will take for them to find housing.
The majority of Canadians are concerned the national housing crisis is affecting their health and quality of life.
We have a housing crisis in Canada. The supply of homes to own as well as to rent is not keeping up with our growing population.
Number of Canadian households who are saying that they're paying more than half of their income towards housing expenses, be that their rent, their mortgage, maintenance. That number is now at 54%.
RBC's Housing Trends report doesn't hold back, saying Vancouver is seeing full-blown crisis levels. It's never been as expensive to own a home anytime, anywhere in Canada as it was in Vancouver in the fourth quarter. People we spoke to say,
if it continues on this trend, obviously, there's a very certain type of people that live here, and it's not going to be young people, that's for sure.
For decades, we've been building our cities far out or higher up. The only two options really available. You grew up on the Canadian dream of owning a 2-story home in the suburbs with a nice fence, a double-car garage, and a big backyard to call your own for you and your family. Or you lived in a small condo downtown, and that's it. Those are really your only two options. And my family experiences firsthand. Our housing journey collectively through love and loss has spanned over 6 decades, including my very own. And when my parents first came to this country, escaping the Idi Amin regime in Uganda, where it was getting increasingly dangerous for South Asians living in Africa, like so many families seeking refuge, they landed here in Canada, a country that was kind enough to open its arms. They didn't just leave a place, though, that they used to call home. They left behind all they knew. Everything they had, familiarity, community, and the only version of home that they had actually grown accustomed to. When they first landed here in Canada, they landed in Montreal because my father had spoken a little French coming from Uganda. But eventually, the work brought him here to Calgary, where he worked and retired after 40 years as a CP rail shop worker. My mother used to work evenings at a hotel so that she could care for her child during the day, and then my dad and mom would switch.
And here's where it all began for my family, here in the community of Marlborough. And a home just like this, in an illegal secondary suite, is where my parents first found their haven. My parents recognized that they needed to be around community. They needed support, they needed infrastructure. And my mom used to work a night job, while my dad used to work a day job. And unfortunately, tragedy struck for my family. My mom's first son was diagnosed with cancer. My mom had to quickly learn English, not only learn the language, but figure out how to navigate a transit system, and was only made viable because she was close to it. And unfortunately, they lost their first kid. And through that loss, and through the love, and the painstaking experience that they had been through, they recognized that home was more than just 4 walls. It was far beyond that. It was a community, it was safety, it was opportunity that actually helped this country, help them build and help them recognize. And after living in a secondary suite, my parents saved up enough money and finally fulfilled their dreams of owning their own home. And this is where I was born, in this duplex in the community of Dover. And my mom was an entrepreneur, and she had this lived experience, and she understood that having a secondary suite actually brought stability. It also brought family. It brought another family who was able to live in our basement while we lived upstairs in a smaller community, and we got to know who lived in our secondary suite. They used to look after us when my mom used to have to take off, or when she went back to India, they would cook food. And it was this community that she built and that she came to understand. And I used to love this part of Dover. Although I was only here for a little while, I remember walking to the 7-Eleven across the street. My brother would actually hold my hand and we'd cross the street and we'd rip over here. We'd grab Slurpees and candies. And I always remembered how awesome it was to have this neighborhood local amenity right across the street from us. And not only was there like this amazing 7-Eleven, I remember some of the other shops. There was actually a pretty awesome Indian shop that had the best jalebies as well. And that's what it was like to live in a community that was actually focused on building community.
Come on into our
No, you're fine. I just wanted to say bye.
Oh, you're heading out?
Yeah, we're gonna head out. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Where did you put the phone, Eva?
I put it. They're from Makati.
They're from what?
Makati.
I love that.
They're from her.
That's from her friend Makati.
Nice. My daughter will love these.
Oh,
She's
she's got
6, so I'll make sure I give it to her.
He's got 2 kids.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say bye. I'm sure I'll see you hopefully you guys soon again. Yeah. Okay.
Dead mouse. It was so dead.
Oh,
That's
no.
good.
Yeah.
That was interesting. Dead mice. We're into that.
Okay. Good seeing you all. Okay, see you, Miss Maria. Got me some stickers for everybody. And this is actually where my middle housing journey began. From Dover as a kid, I moved to Temple, an established community, and the school was steps away from my house. I remember walking to school every single day, and my parents felt comfortable. We were allowed to go and play and wander and go and check out the community store, go play street hockey on the streets, go meander down the alleyways, and go to the corner store and grab a treat. That's what it was like living in established communities. And the best part is the houses were mixed. Not only were they mixed, they were tightly knit together. Garages were around back. Kids played out front. We used to connect, and you can still see all the bikes and people out front. And still today, I just came back to my pal Brock's house, and his mom, Mrs. Murray, still lives in the same house, now with her kids and her grandkids, showing that these communities have this ability to evolve, and they do still encourage people to stay here and create a sense of community that's missing in many of the communities that we're building. And these very communities in which we grew up in are the exact fabric that provide that same opportunity to not only age in place, but to provide the revitalization that's necessary and to live off this existing infrastructure. Because these communities are amazing. They have established trees, they have the right pathway systems, and we could see it firsthand. And so it's super exciting to come back to these communities and recognize that the 3 years that I lived here, albeit that it was short, actually changed my life and made me understand why living here was so awesome for me. Not only because I get to visit my friends and my parents felt very safe with me commuting and everything was close by, it's because the streets were designed and friendly for children to work, live, play, and connect. And when my mom bought her house in Temple, she wasn't just buying a home, she was buying opportunity. She was buying possibility. And this time it went further. She converted our garage into her catering business. This wasn't just her garage, it was her office, it was her life. It was the opportunity for her to build a better life. And that's what I recognized. Although I only lived here for 3 years, this was super impactful for my life in terms of how I lived. Because we could walk to the community store, because the grocery store was close, and like I said, because the cars were out back, things changed. And you recognize this real easily as a kid, and even now as I come back here, and how beautiful the streetscape is and how closely knitted this community is, I understand why this neighborhood was important, not only for me, but also for my mom and our family, and all the things that we had been through when we arrived in this country. Eventually we moved again, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. My family was so excited. We're moving into a single family neighborhood. It was brand new. There was a lake, double car garages, big backyards, and everyone was super excited. But I remember as a kid, I felt like something was different. There was no more sidewalks. I was taking the bus to school. There was this big stormwater thing in the middle of our cul-de-sac. It didn't feel as safe. It wasn't as knitted, and all the houses started to look the same. And then I started to realize that that's how people and we were building. Something needed to change. It's not like this option is not okay. It's actually perfectly fine. It's great. It's just that the options that we had, which blended our neighborhood, allowed for different housing forms, started to really disappear. This is a home I grew up in. As a kid, I always remember walking home and not having a sidewalk because the bus would drop us out at the end of the block. And I would always wonder, why does this have any sidewalks? Why is there this big stormwater catchment thing right in the middle of our cul-de-sac? And I remember in my other neighborhood where I used to live that walking home was one of the best joys of my life. The streets were always vibrant. There was always kids out front. You didn't have to worry about all the cars because it was actually where we used to connect. And this neighborhood changed that. The dynamics of it changed.
Somewhere along the way, We stopped building the in-between. Duplexes, triplexes, row houses, all the kind of housing that quietly filled in the gaps between towers and single-family homes started to vanish from our cities. We call it middle housing, and for a long time, it was normal. It didn't even have a name. You'd find it on every other block, tucked into old neighborhoods, wrapped around parks, within walking distance of shops and schools. But slowly, zoning laws tightened, neighborhoods closed in, and the sense of community started vanishing. The single-family home, with its big backyard, double-car garage, and front porch, became the definition of success and the cultural norm. And yeah, there's something beautiful about it. About coming home to your own space, soaking up the sun in your backyard. But when that became the only version of home we knew, or had to aspire to, or were allowed to build, we lost something. Our laws started to constitutionally push out the options we had. Starting in the early 1920s, cities began introducing zoning laws. See, in the 20s and 30s, many local governments started carving neighborhoods into zones where only single families were allowed. That might sound innocent, but the impact was anything but. In the Supreme Court case in 1926 of Euclid v. Amber, zoning laws became fully legal. It was in the opinions of the court referred to apartments as mere parasites and validated separating them from single-family homes. That ruling opened the door for cities across North America to push middle housing out of the picture. But this wasn't just about building types. It was also about race. In the following decades, racially restrictive laws were used to keep Black families and other racialized groups out of desirable neighborhoods. And because of how wealth and race were distributed in North America, these policies disproportionately excluded Black families, immigrants, and working class residents. Remember, when we talk about zoning, we're not just talking about what kind of housing you build on a lot. We're talking about who gets to live in a neighborhood, who gets access to good schools, walkable streets, and opportunity, and who gets pushed to the edges, which has been happening in our communities for decades historically. To add more context, we need to travel back to the early 20th century, back to a man named Harlan Bartholomew. He's not a household name, but in many ways, he wrote the script for how North American cities grew and who they grew for. Bartholomew was America's first full-time city planner. He helped shape zoning laws across the continent, including here in Canada. He was one of the first to institutionalize land use zoning, championed strict separation between residential, commercial, and industrial zones. He promoted car-centric developments, low-density suburbs, and the idea of housing should be orderly and uniform. But his plans weren't neutral, they were deeply ideological. He believed in separating land uses strictly. Homes over here, shops over there, factories far away. And I'm sure he had good intentions at the time. But I believe more than that, he started to separate people by class, and sometimes intentionally, and maybe other times unintentionally. And in the US, he explicitly supported racial covenants, legal clauses that prevented Black families from buying homes in white neighborhoods. And Canadian planners, many of whom trained under the same American ideologies or inspired by US planning literature, followed suit. In Canada, we didn't have the same legal covenants per se, but we adopted many of the same ideas which mirrored Bartholomew's blueprint. Large lot zoning, car-centric developments, and a preference for single-family detached homes. See, the single-family home was marketed as a dream space. It was privacy, freedom. But it did become a tool for separation, and we must acknowledge that. Sarah Bronin, a Cornell University professor and director of the National Zoning Atlas in the US, said, "Zoning kills housing by 1,000 cuts." But if zoning built exclusion in our city, then can it be the tool we use today to knit back our cities? Across North America, a growing shift is underway. A movement to reimagine our established neighborhoods are shaping up. And things are happening. Take Edmonton, for example. In 2023, it became the first major Canadian city to eliminate single-family zoning altogether. In May 2024, Calgary City Council approved a significant citywide rezoning initiative. aimed at creating more housing diversity and affordability. This move transitioned the base residential zoning to RCG, a district that allows for a broader range of housing types: the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, row houses, and secondary suites. But that change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without challenges. There was 98 suggestions within the housing strategy, and only one of them was very controversial: the ending of exclusionary zoning. Some residents and politicians across North America continue to worry about parking, about traffic, about changing neighborhood character. See, we created this series to talk about possibility, to talk about opportunity. And we're going to start right here in Calgary, right inside City Hall, with the very city councillor who helped steward the housing strategy and changed a law that we never saw coming.